Thank you. I'm glad to hear I can be heard. I'm not just talking to no one, which is good. So what I'm going to do is going to give you a quick overview of some of the new features in VBS3. It's not an extensive look, but for people who are aware of VBS3 and our users, hopefully there's some nice, exciting stuff in here that you'll see coming in near future releases. So the first question I'm going to cover is on the way that VBS3 and VBS4 interact and how the transition will work. VBS3 continues to be supported for the foreseeable future is the first comment. All new technologies that we're developing in VBS3 are being merged into VBS4. And we're gathering data from all the contractual authorities that we're currently working with that have support in place with us. But there is no firm cutoff point for support at this point. What we can say is it's going to be multiple years away at this point. With that, I'm going to go straight on to the next slide. So CBRN, we've done a lot of work on adding new CBRN features to VBS3. Those who are aware of VBS3 and have used it in the past will know that we've had things like sarin gas and mustard gas for a while now. That has been dramatically expanded now to add nuclear and chemical weapon effects. You can now define an arbitrary hazardous area. So you can place a hazardous area in the real-time editor and define what type of agent is within that area. So for instance, you could set it up to be a liquid chemical agent contamination or an airborne chemical agent. If it's a liquid chemical agent, that chemical agent is now transferable as well. So as you move into a contaminated area with a liquid chemical agent, an individual can become contaminated, and that contamination can be tracked by the administrator. And you'll see that later in the video. But essentially, a individual trainee can be contaminated, move into a vehicle, and that vehicle will then be contaminated, allowing administrators to track the contamination chain as it runs. We have new simulated detection devices as well. So M8 and M9 papers, as well as the AN77 and PDR. They work and emulate the way the real devices work. And you'll see that in the video in a second. A lot of new decontamination equipment as well to go alongside the contamination side. Things like steam cleaners for decontaminating vehicles and medication to be applied to human trainees. New plume simulation. So the plume simulation has been enhanced and allows you to visualize the spread and dispersion of a plume of a hazardous area you've placed. So if you place a hazardous area with a airborne chemical agent and you configure the scenario settings with a wind direction and velocity, you will see the contamination spread visually as an admin, and the contamination effect will disperse as well and impact trainees in an accurate manner. All of the new CBRN equipment is now individually equipable as well. So you can equip discrete parts of the equipment. You can just pick up a mask, or you can just pick up the gloves, or you can just pick up the boots. And they have a independent effect on the user. So if you only wear gloves, for instance, but you're not wearing a respirator, you may get away with a liquid chemical agent, but you won't get away with a gas agent. I'm going to quickly find a video for you and start playing. So in the video here, you can see a hazardous area. The admin has moved the vehicle into the hazardous area, which has contaminated it. The user is going to equip a JCAD detection device. You'll see he'll hold it up in front of him. Currently set to an area detection mode. You'll see a little emulated display in the top right. As you start moving towards the vehicle, you'll see the detection be triggered. And there is an audible alarm as well, which is sounded at the same time. Here's a better view of the contamination. You drag the vehicle in, you can see the contamination symbol appear over the vehicle. It also appears in the unit list, which gives the admins a really good way of tracking the contamination chain. This is one of the other detection devices. This is an M8 paper. In reality, you touch it on the vehicle. In the simulation, it works exactly the same way. And you can see there it's detected a nerve agent. This is a very quick demonstration of a creation of a decontamination area. It's actually a generic piece of equipment that allows you to tape up areas. In this case, we're using it to define a decontamination area. You could use it for whatever you like. The use case initially, though, was specifically for decontamination to mark off vehicles so that they could be washed and cleaned of contaminants. You can see here, very simple to operate from a first-person point of view. There we go. So I'm going to switch back to the presentation. New unit symbology, rather. So unit symbology essentially taken the current symbology that was in VBS3 and enhanced it. It's a lot clearer now to see visually. It replaces all the old VBS3 symbology you may be familiar with. Under the hood, it's driven by SIDC identification codes. So these are actually embedded within the configurations of the content of VBS3 and VBS4. So as new content is added, we are actually populating the SIDC symbol the best we can. As you may be aware, the SIDC has some variance and can alter depending on which country is viewing it. But we give you a base configuration of SIDC. One of the key points here is the admin can now override that system as well. So if it isn't the correct variant or you want to alter it slightly, there is a way that you can override the way the symbols have been associated with the object. There's a new automatic visual aggregation of the symbologies as well. As you zoom out of the map, you may have a fairly cluttered view of lots of entities. They will be automatically aggregated together into their group symbols. And vice versa. Obviously, as you zoom in, they'll be deaggregated so you can see the individual units. And this is a unified system that's being applied across all our products now. So the symbology will be the same if you're viewing them in VBS3, in VBS4, in plan tools within VBS4, or even the external mapping tool. I'm just going to see if we have a new video. We do. Let's play this quickly. So this just shows off some of the new symbology. I probably won't let it play all the way through, but you can see here placing the individual units and the way that the unit symbology is being correctly associated with them. So the whole database, all of the content will have a symbol associated with it. And as I said, if it is not the correct variant, you can always override it yourself. And I'll show that in a second. The symbols work in 2D and 3D. They are a lot clearer to see visually than they used to be, and hopefully are more true to the standard than the originals were. So I'm actually going to skip on from here now. I think hopefully that gives you the idea of how they look. So as I mentioned, one of the things that we've also added is the ability to configure these symbols. So you can modify an entity symbol. So you can choose an OP4 vehicle, for instance, and change it to an unknown vehicle. These are purely visual changes, so they do not affect the simulation, but they allow you to alter the visual appearance for the purposes of presentation or for training. You can actually do this in AAR as well. So if you wanted to modify a vehicle for the purposes of an AAR or the symbology, you could also do that. We also now have the ability to add live symbol metadata. So data that the engine can drive to the marker itself. So you can probably see in the screenshots, but you'll see it in the video in a second here. We have the standard, the metadata locations around the symbol, and you can choose what data to put in those marker areas, including things like altitude and entity speed and heading, URN, etc. Let me just find that video for you quickly. So you can see here, we have a couple of units. This is going to quickly show you the unit symbol configuration. You have the entire 2525C library to choose from. In this case, we're actually applying a change in the metadata around the symbols. You can see here the altitude of the helicopter. This can be applied globally, so you can see metadata for all the entities, or you can apply it to an individual. So there is a list of variables that are made available to you. We'd be interested to hear from you if you would like to add more, if you want more, or you would like to change the way they're displayed. At the moment, this is the kind of starter for 10 of listed metadata. So you can see here the sort of visual clarity it now gives you compared to the older system. So you can see here the actual changing of a symbol, and again, this doesn't affect the simulation. You've got the entire 2525C library to choose from, so you can tinker to your heart's content and come up with all kinds of crazy symbols. And as I said, these are recorded in the AR, and you can actually modify them in the AR. So you have quite a lot of flexibility there. Let's go back to the slides. We have a new unit list, which you may have got a glimpse in one of those videos just there. Essentially, we've taken the old unit list, which hopefully, if you are a VBS3 user, you will know very well, and greatly improved its clarity, the way the symbols are represented, and the ease of navigation, things like filtering, and most importantly, actually, we've improved the performance. As we start supporting larger entity and larger amounts of entities, obviously we want to make sure that the performance of that unit list is as good as it possibly can be. So quick video here, and again to the previous point, the symbols are unified, as in they appear in the same way in the unit list as they do on the 2D map. We have also split the unit list now into two separate tabs. So you have purely ORBAT entities, so these are simulated entities, and you have scenario objects. You can see here the vehicles, the units being highlighted. You can also see waypoints associated with groups appearing in the list for you. So rather than scrabbling around trying to find out which waypoints are associated with which groups, they are clearly defined and visible rather within the new unit list. And as you add more waypoints, and at runtime, those waypoints get reached, they will update in that list as well. So as a move order is reached, that waypoint will disappear, and the next waypoint will become active. So it's a lot more simple to navigate and a lot easier to find what you're looking for. There is a full search box as well, as you can probably see at the top there. So if you're searching for a specific entity, as per normal, you can search and find that. Hopefully in a second here, we will switch over to the scenario objects. So here is where you will find all of the elements which are, not actually living simulated entities, more like editor objects. In this case, we've got water current objects, but there'd be things like triggers or objects or artillery strikes. Again, very clearly separating and making it very easy to find what you're looking for. And we also have a whole load of filters. This was actually a work in development when the video was taken. There is a whole load more filters that have been added. But of note, you can filter for things like side and vehicle type. And importantly, also, if you're doing a large interoperability demonstration or experiment, you can filter specifically for external entities, so those entities which are coming from an external simulator. So it's a very quick overview of the new unit list. As I said, we continue to add more filters. If you have any special requests for filters or things that we may have missed, please, we'd love to hear from you, and any guidance is well received. So I'm going to stop this video and move on to the next one. 2D map overlays. So we think this is going to be quite a popular new feature that's added into VBS. It's essentially, this allows you to take a map, a geo-referenced image, and overlay it over the VBS 2D map. Those maps, it doesn't matter if it's geo-referenced to start with, you can use a tool like QGIS and create a geo-reference map in any of the formats that we support. Currently, we support MB tiles, GeoJSON, KMZ, and KML. Those Google formats are particularly interesting if you're used to using Google Earth and Google Maps. You can make a drawing in Google Earth, for instance, and then create that as an overlay within VBS. The more normal workflow possibly is to take a standard GeoTIFF and take that into QGIS and export an MB tile database. That is the standard approach that we use. MB Tiles is a really nice tiled format which performs very well. But essentially, you have many options now to import overlays. I will very quickly get that video up for you. So we're actually in the saw through plane terrain at the moment. Very simply, you find the path to your file. You can see the supported files in the list there. In this case, we're going to load up a MB tile database, and then instantly it's displayed. There's a couple of settings there. You can toggle the visibility and you can change the opacity. We have left it pretty open. You can define what sort of mapping you want to use. Obviously, it really just needs to be a georeferenced image, and it will be correctly overlaid into the terrain. And we hope this will be a very useful feature. And again, we very welcome any feedback you might want to give us on that. Exaggerated view. So this is another relatively common request. So exaggerated view essentially is an administrator tool that allows you to exaggerate entities in the scene. Particularly useful if you're doing a large-scale exercise or you're presenting the current situation to hires or to an audience. This is a purely admin tool. It doesn't affect what the trainees see. So you can play with all these settings as admin and not worry about your trainees suddenly seeing large blue entities walking around. Essentially, all of these things can be applied in the AR as well. So if you didn't run the exaggerated view in the live training, you can turn it on during the AR to get a better view. And you'll see in the video in a second how it can be applied. It's very simply under the view menu, and then you have exaggerated view mode. You can see most of the settings there. You can apply it globally as it's being applied here, or you can apply it to a specific vehicle. The colors that are used are the standard side colors. You can tweak those as well and change into any color you like. Nothing affects the simulation, so changing the scale of the entities doesn't affect the way the AI think of the entities or anything else. But we hope it gives you a really nice, quick way to get situational awareness of the terrain. As I said, most useful for presentations, and as we move to larger scale exercises, will become more necessary to get a really quick view of the battlefield. Hidden entities. So hidden entities is a really powerful new administrator tool. What this allows you to do is to create a entity laydown. So you can create a group, you can give that group waypoints, but then you can tell the simulation that you want those entities to be hidden. What this means is when you start the simulation, those entities won't be simulated. They won't be visible to any trainee. The administrator will be able to see grayed out versions of those entities in 2D. And at any point during the exercise, you can turn on these entities. They will be unhidden, become visible, and start simulating as if they were normal entities. As you can imagine, the huge power of this is for you to plan multiple courses of action prior to beginning a training scenario. So enemies to the east, enemies to the north, and then decide which ones you're going to unhide without having to have a huge amount of entities in the scenario, which may actually skew your training results if you don't need them to be there. So just let me find the video very quickly. This was actually recorded whilst using the previous unit list, but you can see in the unit list there's a very clear marker similar to like you would see in something like Photoshop, which shows you that those entities are invisible or not being simulated. And we have the markers very clear to the administrator that they are not visible, not active. Very quickly actioned by the administrator, you can activate them. They are activated instantly. And as I said, the waypoints associated with them are activated at the same time. So you can plan some pretty complex movements and behaviors for those entities prior to your scenario starting to set up several different actions. We have some new. Sorry about that. My headset's decided to die at the same time in both presentations, which is great. So we have some new Call for Fire features which have been added to VBS3. We now support naval and self-propelled guns, along with mortars and towed assets. So that's any naval asset. The ones that have been added by default are things like the Oli Arup. One of the important things that we've also done now is we've added support for OP4 gunners. So you can now configure both OP4 and Blue4 fire missions from a single Call for Fire from the single Call for Fire module. You can modify which elements or which objects you want to appear in your gun lines as well. The configuration files are there. You can simply put in the class name of the vehicle you want represented, give it a new name, and it will appear in your new Call for Fire gun line dropdowns. You can now modify the gun line dispersion. So previously the dispersion was pretty laser accurate. Now we've added the dispersion capability so that when working or trying to simulate OP4 gunners who may not be as well trained, you can specify the dispersion, the average dispersion that those guns will have, allowing you to make them less accurate than they would normally be, or vice versa. You can also now create custom gunline positioning. So if you have a doctrinal gunline position, or gunline positioning rather, you can create that once. You can save that as a preset. Every time you create a new gun line, you can then load that preset for the positioning of those guns, rather than having to reconfigure it every time you place them. We have some new gateway configuration. So gateway is our interoperability tool, so it supports DIS and HLA. We now include all of these CISO disenumerations as part of the configuration for the content. So if you are using our content, the disenumeration should be relatively correct, possibly not down to the variation, but at least to the type as close as we can find. You can also, when you create your own content, inherit from our content. So for instance, if you were to place a variant of the M1A1 and you inherited from our M1A1, the CISO enumeration would also be inherited. You can either override that with your own enumeration or just use ours, and then there's no additional configuration for you to do. The VBS3 library and VBS4 library have been updated so that the majority of entities within it have these embedded configurations. What this means is now that we have a way of adding the configs, or adding enumerations to the configs, there is now a tool within Gateway to scan those configs. So if you do add a load of new content with new enumerations, you can just click scan, and the mappings will be updated within Gateway. As always, if you're used to seeing these presentations, we have added a huge amount of new content again. I haven't listed all of it, but there is a vast amount of it. A lot of near-peer Chinese and Russian entities, covering quite a lot of the non-traditional assets as well, so EW and AA assets. A lot of them are extremely high detail. There are vehicles as well, like Puma IFV, for instance, has just been added, which also simulates the LSAS system, so the local situational awareness system. I.e., it simulates the cameras. When you're in that vehicle, you can turn different situational awareness cameras on and off, and operate things like the complex weapons system, which includes airburst rounds, for instance. Things like the F-35B, Gazelle, Fennec, Coyote, a whole bunch of entities, which I won't go into great detail on. I'll just skip to the sexy pictures. A lot of new drones, including off-the-shelf commercial drones. So things from DJI, also obviously a whole bunch of new military drones. A lot of airfield equipment, so mobile control towers, fuelers, all the sort of equipment that goes alongside an airfield. New helicopters, and new support and engineering vehicles. Again, new sexy screenshots. Down in the bottom left is the new M1A1 developed for the Australians. So that's a new high detail version of the M1A1, which has been added to the system. A whole bunch of new personal weapons as well have been added. again, available to every VBS user. I'm going to switch gear now. So that completes the sort of VBS3 section. I'm going to quickly cover what's coming in TerraTools 591, which is going to be released at the end of the year. Highlights there. So this includes CDB support. So it allows you to import and export CDB alongside other standard formats. It includes all of the latest VBS3, VBS4, and BlueIG support. So you can take your correlated terrains and export directly to VBS4 runtime formats, for instance, and VBS3 and IG at the same time. It also now supports direct import of VBS geo modifications. So if you spend hours in VBS4 making a really nice high detail geo edit, you can import that edit directly into TerraTools, so it becomes available to export to other runtime formats. So you can create a correlated inset with all of the supported formats that are supported by TerraTools. So things like OpenFlight, VBSim, CDB, SteelBeast, etc., etc. You can now also directly publish to the world server. So you can connect the TerraTools directly to the world server. You can modify your terrain inset. You can publish, and that inset, as soon as it is up on the world server, becomes available to any connected client from VBS4 to BlueIG, or any other runtime that is reading from that VWS. There is also now a direct pipeline to import LiDAR data. So as you're probably aware, devices like the new Apple iPad, including simple LiDAR scanners, if you can get that LiDAR data in LAS or LAZ format, which is the standard sort of LAS LiDAR format, you can import that directly into your TerraTools project now. And we actually cover that in one of the previous tech sessions, which you can find on our YouTube channel, which goes into how that looks in a VBS4 terrain. So I think I've covered the majority of it there, and I think we're on to questions.